Some families don't scream as they fall apart. They crack with polite smiles, full dinner tables, and eyes that glance away when truth walks in. I once believed silence was a solid foundation. But in truth, it was the loudest explosion waiting to happen, tucked inside the walls of a house that looked warm from the outside. My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 32, a neonatal nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Denver. They call me the angel of sleepy babies, but I've never seen myself as an angel. I just hold the infants when they cry and steady their mother's breath when the doctor brings the kind of news that cuts deeper than any blade. I live alone in a small apartment in Washington Park. Sunlight pours through my balcony window, and a stubborn lavender plant has survived 3 Colorado winters there. On Saturday mornings, I sip coffee, knit tiny hats for the NICU, and drift into memories back when I was still the youngest daughter in the Callahan home. People use us as a perfect backdrop for their favorite family tales. My mother, Eleanor, a full-time homemaker. My father, Russell, a retired firefighter. And my sister, Sienna Callahan, the shining star of Denver real estate. She drives a sleek electric car, speaks the language of success, and always arrives camera ready. We used to have family dinners, lasagna from scratch, Dad sharing firehouse stories. I laughed the loudest, even when no one remembered what I had said. When Sienna bought her downtown penthouse, we threw a celebration. Mom cried. Dad said, "You make the Callahans proud." And I meant it when I congratulated her. Back then, I had no idea that while I was busy guarding newborns' first breaths, someone I trusted was slowly extracting pieces of my life, using them to stitch a dazzling costume for herself. I hadn't yet recognized the cheating stories brewing beneath the surface. I hadn't named the unease. But something inside me, like a guitar string pulled too tight, like an eye that avoids yours, started to quiver. Quietly, but enough to rattle my peace. I ignored the long silences in our calls, blamed them on adulthood, but now I know those silences were leaks. Tiny holes where truth tried to seep through, and I patched them up with kindness. Like many revenge stories, mine didn't begin in rage. It began in love, unreciprocated, misused. I wasn't born to be angry. I only wanted to be seen, to be trusted, to say my own name without shaking. I never expected hidden revenge to become part of my story. I never set out to hurt anyone. But I've learned this much. Sometimes, standing up for your truth is the only kind of revenge that doesn't cost you your soul. In the perfect family portrait you hold dear, is there a detail you once ignored, one that turned out to be the fuse beneath it all? Not every betrayal rips you apart in a day. Some arrive in tiny drips. Each gesture, each look, each growing silence, wearing you down slowly. And when you finally notice, you realize it was you who kept stitching yourself back together just to preserve a family portrait that had died long ago. I never stopped loving Sienna. No matter how much she changed, no matter how her voice now echoed with the cadence of the elite, I still remember the sister who used to save the last cookie for me beneath the old kitchen table. I kept telling myself, maybe the distance between us was just a byproduct of growing up. But somewhere between the dinner invites where I showed up in my plain dress and her quick glances when I talked about work, I began to feel a chasm wider than adulthood. I was always the good one, the one who never asked, the one who made things easier, the one who drove an old car, wore a frayed backpack, reused coffee cups because they were still fine. The one who didn't complain when her birthday was forgotten. The one who smiled when Mom said, "Your sister really takes care of this family," even though I had been sending money home for 3 years while Dad was unemployed. They called me the healer of sleepy newborns. But no one asked who would heal me when my own heart had been deceived by the people I trusted most. One day, I sat across from Sienna at a cafe we used to love, and I noticed the shirt she wore. It was one I'd left at Mom's. The tiny earrings I'd once hidden in a jewelry box now sparkled on her ears. I smiled, but something inside me cracked, soft but real. I started seeing pieces of myself everywhere, lines she quoted, a hairstyle she copied, even the design of her apartment that was inspired by her little sister's cozy place, she said on Instagram. I used to believe imitation was flattery, but this wasn't admiration. This was identity theft. No gun, no blood, but still a true infidelity story. Because infidelity stories aren't just about beds and lovers. They're also about placing your trust in someone, especially someone in your family, and watching them use that trust to build a more polished version of you without needing you at all. And so, everything began with a phone call. A cold, mechanical voice from the bank asking about a loan for over $700,000 under my name for a house I'd never heard of. I hung up, but I wasn't the kind of woman who just hung up anymore. I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. Someone has to answer for this theft. And this time it won't be me. Now that the truth has come to light, will you keep pretending to sleep peacefully in the role of the obedient sibling? Identity isn't just a string of numbers or a name on a card. It's proof that you've lived, loved, tried, and chosen to walk this world with kindness. When someone steals that, they don't just take your signature, they rob your right to be. And when that happens, the alarm doesn't just ring in the phone call. It rings down your spine, vertebra by vertebra, until you finally rise. That call wasn't a dream. It was the beginning of a storm wrapped in a robotic voice. We need to verify a $734,000 loan for the property at. I froze when I heard the street name. Sienna's house. Not mine. Not my address. I dropped the phone and sat on the floor. For the first time in 5 years, I called in to take leave from work. Are you sure? The head nurse asked. I nodded. My voice was a whisper, like it had been strangled from the inside. I didn't need rest. I needed war. I walked into the bank wearing my plainest clothes, like dressing down would make me harder to underestimate. The man who met me was named Dean. Honest eyes. Soft voice. He handed me copies of the loan files, application forms, employment verifications, signature pages. All in my name, with my social, my birthday, my job title. All of it fake. It felt like watching an episode of cheating wife stories, only I was the one being betrayed by my own sister. This wasn't a husband sneaking around on his wife. This was a true infidelity story in disguise, a sibling using blood and trust to build a castle made of my name. Dean looked at me, gently. We'll launch an investigation, but the application was processed from a Denver IP. Not far from your sister's residence. I thought back to the countless times Sienna asked to borrow my ID because she'd forgotten her wallet. The documents she had me sign just to save time. The transaction she said she'd handle because it's more efficient that way. I thought being helpful was noble. I didn't realize kindness could be used as handcuffs. Now I was the one unfastening the chain, knot by knot. I went home, printed emails and bank statements, opened my old notebook and wrote. No one gets to define me but me. And anyone who tries will face the consequences. This wasn't just financial fraud. This was family-level cheating, one of those stories cheating your soul out of its own reflection. When your loved ones steal your name to build sandcastles, will you let the wind take your identity, or will you rise and rebuild it from the ashes? Sometimes the door you thought would lead to salvation is just a thin slab of wood hiding the flames of hell. Not every apology is sincere. Not every hug is warm. Some homes are nothing more than pretty backdrops for a crumbling play, and some relatives are the very reason you had to learn to escape from the person you were supposed to be. I got a call from my mother. Not the kind you picture in family drama stories. The sweet, "How are you doing, honey?" type. No, her voice was cold, like wind slicing through a sealed window. "Can you come over for dinner this Sunday? The family wants to talk." I hung up without answering. But of course I went, because no matter how far I had drifted, I was still the daughter in a family with 2 children, and the one whose face didn't make it into the photo over the fireplace. My parents' house hadn't changed. The same beige couch, the fake pastel flowers, and that framed photo of Sienna in her graduation cap right above the mantel. I looked around and felt like a guest in a story that used to belong to me. Mom smiled. Dad gave me a nod. Sienna stood at the end of the table, pouring wine like nothing had happened, as if no infidelity story had been cracked open through a bank statement. "You're misunderstanding things," she began, as if betrayal was something that could be erased with the right tone of voice. I stayed silent. No one truly apologized. They just wanted me to stay quiet, wanted me to forgive, to slide everything back into the old order, an order I was never allowed to shape. I had stayed silent for too long, swallowed so much I forgot the sound of my own voice. I said, "I didn't come here for dinner. I came to make something clear. Whoever in this family falsified documents under my name will be held legally accountable." The air turned cold, like someone had opened a freezer mid-sentence. Sienna smirked. "Are you seriously planning to sue your own sister?" I looked her dead in the eye. If that's the only way to reclaim my name, then yes. What used to seem like family revenge stories was no longer about payback. It was a war to reclaim the right to be myself. No one has the authority to blur me out of the life I built with my own hands. After dinner, I left without another word. On the way home, I didn't cry. I wrote one line in my notebook. Human revenge isn't about striking back. It's about surviving the burial and walking out of the grave with your own fire in hand. If it's your own family who opened the door to hell, do you still have the courage to carve your own exit through the smoke? Not every fire starts with a match. Some flames ignite from a printed page where your name sits next to debts, fraud accusations, or unpaid taxes. When you see yourself blackened on white paper, you're no longer just a victim. You become the only one who knows how to sift through ashes and choose which fire to keep alive. That's when you learn burning revenge can be silent and strategic. I began every morning like a detective working her own case. Cold coffee, tired eyes, but my hands kept flipping through files printed the night before. The IRS sent warnings. My credit score plummeted to rock bottom, and the bank, where I once placed my trust, started calling like I was a fugitive. I took notes on everything, numbered every document. Each line of black ink on white paper felt like a clean stab. No blood, but sharp and deep. We found a $112,000 loan for a home renovation at an unverified address. Credit card debt from an account opened last year in Miami under your name. A business grant application under investigation for falsified income. I don't remember when my name became someone else's gold mine. Maybe it was the time I let Sienna borrow my insurance card because she forgot hers. Or maybe it was that one birthday dinner at Mom's, when I left my wallet in her room for just an hour. In family tales, they tell us to share everything. But no one talks about sharing your identity. Dad stayed silent. Mom texted, "Let's keep this dignified for the family's sake." Family betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers, soft and familiar, and makes you question the very ground you're standing on. I sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking. But I wrote anyway. I drafted a 7-page report for my lawyer. I built a spreadsheet of every fraudulent action. I filed an official complaint with the FBI, because revenge isn't always hot and angry. Sometimes it's calm and clear-eyed. It's knowing you've walked through hell and still remembered to carry the evidence. Every time I sent in a report, every PDF I attached, I felt like I was lighting up a burning revenge, not to destroy anyone, but to illuminate the life of mine they tried to dim. They didn't expect this from me. They still saw me as the quiet younger sister, the nurse who listens, the girl who never speaks up. But this time, I didn't need permission. If you're the only one who still believes in your truth, will you stay silent for the sake of peace, or rise from the ashes and reclaim your name, blackened though it may be? Ink may seem lifeless at first, but once it hits the page, it carries breath, truth, and sometimes rebellion. Never underestimate the power of a letter written with trembling hands. Because those silent lines, without screaming, without spilling blood, are the truest form of hidden revenge, rising not from fury, but from the heart that's been split open and still dares to speak. I started writing letters. Not apologies, not pleas, accusations. I sat in my small apartment, desk lamp casting a warm glow over each word. Every sentence I wrote reclaimed a piece of my truth, stolen and bent beyond recognition. I didn't write from rage. I wrote from memory. And memory, when it is sobered up, is stronger than any courtroom testimony. I sent a letter to the National Nursing Board, where I once served with all my integrity. I detailed how my personal information had been misused. I enclosed credit reports, bank documents, even emails Sienna had sent from an IP address that matched the loan application location. Not a single detail omitted. Then I sent a letter to the family's attorney, the one who once told me, "You should forgive your sister, blood doesn't change." But now I knew, no one gets to ask you for silence just because your betrayer shares your last name. Family tales aren't always pretty. Some stories smell like old ink, pages torn, stitched back together with threads of deception. And cheating stories aren't just about lovers who stray. Sometimes, it's when you hand your trust to someone who shares your childhood, and they turn that trust into a credit card, a bank account, a forged signature. I wrote it all down. Clear, precise, unafraid, because I knew this. Hidden revenge isn't about hatred. It's about clarity. It's about living clean, living loud, and letting every word speak what your shaking voice once couldn't. Each letter I sealed with my fingerprint, not for anyone else's recognition, but to remind myself I exist. And what they tried to erase, a woman who knew how to rebuild from ash. I didn't pound the table. I didn't scream in the dark. I printed. I mailed. I filed copies. I documented every date, every recipient, every breath between. This wasn't emotion anymore. This was infrastructure. A system built by a woman who had been smeared in silence and now turned herself into undeniable evidence. And if they thought I'd stop here, they read the wrong kind of story, because the best revenge stories never start with an explosion. They start with a drop of ink, a single line, a testimony no one can rewind. If one drop of ink could rewrite your entire life story, would you hand the pen to the one who betrayed you, or would you grip it tighter and finally write it yourself? Some family dinners don't begin with a cheerful bon appetit, but with a sideways glance loaded with suspicion. Some desserts aren't sweet. They're the solidified silence of all the things no one dared to say. When the truth is served after the last course, you stop craving sugar. You learn to chew bitterness, because that's how you finally digest the betrayal stories they once forced you to swallow in silence. I arrived at the family gathering with a folder full of documents and a smile that never showed up. Mom made apple pie. my childhood favorite. But that day, not even cinnamon could cover the scent of suspicion floating like smoke in the air. Sienna poured water like she owed no one anything. Even though the files in my hands proved a true infidelity story, not about marriage, but about blood ties twisted and exploited. "What do you think you want from me?" Sienna asked, her voice not arrogant, but guarded. "Money, an apology, my reputation." I opened the folder, laid each statement down on the table. The sound of paper hitting would echoed like a warning bell. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just needed them to see. Every letter, every date, was wound with a timestamp. "I don't need money. I need my name back." Dad stayed silent. As always, his silence was the lid that kept our infidelity stories from ever boiling over into daylight. I placed the final document, a notarized letter from the bank, right next to the apple pie. No one touched their forks. I've sent everything to the Department of Justice. My attorney is on the case. And if I have to, I'll go public. Mom sighed. Families shouldn't take each other to court. I looked at her, not with the eyes of a daughter still aching for validation, but with the gaze of a woman who no longer flinches. Exactly. That's why this never should have happened. This wasn't one of those fictional betrayal stories you catch in late-night movies. This was real. This was blood and paperwork and a name they tried to erase with their silence and schemes. When I stood up, I didn't need to say anything more. I had already spoken with action. The folder in my hand didn't feel as heavy as when I walked in. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was a key to a new chapter, one where I chose the truth, even if it didn't taste as sweet as dessert. When the dessert comes plated with truth, will you fake a smile and swallow? Or will you set the spoon down and say, "I've had enough lies for a lifetime"? Tears used to be the only language I knew how to speak in a family that chose deception over listening. But one day you stop crying. You write. You speak. You sign the complaint. And you realize some truths aren't born out of love, but from betrayal that cut you open and made you bleed. And then it solidified into an accusation too sharp, too real, and too necessary to take back. The day I signed the criminal complaint was the day I stopped seeking forgiveness from people who never once said sorry. I had cried too much, until my tears lost their taste, left only sting. Like acid dripping into hands still trying to hold on to scraps of blood-bound decency. But the truth is this, even blood can sharpen into a blade, and I had been stabbed from within my own house. This wasn't just a true infidelity story. This was a series of stories cheating not on lovers, but on kinship. Sienna used my name to sign loans, open credit cards, fake addresses, and build a parallel financial identity, all wrapped in the packaging of the responsible sister, the loving wife, the dutiful daughter. I sat across from the investigator, handing over every piece of proof, emails, IP logs, even a recorded phone call where Sienna casually confessed, "I just borrowed your name for a bit." No big deal. She thought everything was temporary. But hurt isn't temporary. She thought silence meant consent. But I am no longer the girl who lets things slide. The investigator looked up, eyes sharp. "You understand this could lead to criminal prosecution, right?" I nodded. "If I don't protect myself, who will?" I used to believe someone in the family would step up, say something, do something. But no one did. They were too busy preserving the illusion of an uncracked family photo, an image I was never truly part of. I was the corner cropped out, the shadow painted over with glossy lies. This isn't about cheating wife stories whispered over coffee. This is about a woman betrayed by her own blood, labeled difficult, simply for fighting back. I used to cry, but today I speak, and my voice doesn't tremble. It testifies. It rings like a verdict, loud and final, ending years lived under the weight of hollow promises and conditional love. If betrayal comes dressed in your sister's voice, wears the mask of family, and calls your name with the warmth of history, will you keep crying in silence, or will you rise, grab the files, and say, I will press charges because I deserve a life free from lies? Justice doesn't always arrive in a black robe, holding scales and a sword. Sometimes she wears a gray sweater, worn-out sneakers, and sits for 3 hours in a county office, filling out forms with a shaky but determined hand. The justice I believe in doesn't need to look powerful. She just needs to show up, with evidence in hand and a woman by her side who has finally learned how not to stay silent. I walked into court in an old button-down, scuffed shoes, and a file so thick it felt like armor. No cameras clicked. No reporters whispered. No cinematic slow motion. But for me, it was the first time I'd entered a room where my name wasn't being used. It was being protected. No swords. Just paperwork. And the truth. Sienna didn't show. Her lawyer stood in. She filed for postponement. But this time, the court denied it. Because this wasn't a family misunderstanding anymore. This was identity fraud, financial betrayal, an infidelity story in the form of spreadsheets, where blood ties turned to currency, and trust got sold like a used car on Craigslist. I testified clearly, line by line, presented every receipt. I didn't beg. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth. And in a world full of family drama stories, sometimes the truth, told plainly, hits harder than any monologue. Their lawyer looked at me and asked, You really want your sister behind bars? This is a criminal case. I met his gaze. I'm not putting her anywhere. She walked into the dark on her own. I just turned the light on. Justice didn't show up with a fanfare. She sat beside me when I opened my cold lunch in the parking lot afterward and realized I'd finally reclaimed something. My dignity, my name, the right to walk through life without flinching. I used to think revenge had to be blazing, dramatic, like the family revenge stories on TV. But human revenge, it doesn't need applause. It needs focus. It needs someone who chooses legal precision over chaos. Someone who refuses to keep playing the victim. Just because it's easier than being the one who speaks up. When the hearing ended, I didn't smile. I exhaled. For the first time in years, I wasn't breathing inside the suffocating fog of manipulation. Justice doesn't erase your past, but it clears the road ahead so you can live the rest of your life under your real name. If justice isn't flashy or loud but steady and quiet, would you still choose to fight for the truth? Or keep living inside an infidelity story you never agreed to be written into? Some holidays don't come with laughter. No one rings the doorbell. Just blinking string lights on a blank wall and empty chairs no one's sitting in. But you know what's still present? Silence. The silence of someone who once held the whole family together and now chooses to hold herself. And in that quiet, you learn burning revenge doesn't have to scream. It just needs to be precise. I hung the Christmas lights alone, not because I like silence, but because I'm no longer afraid of it. Each strand wrapped around the railing is a story I never got to tell in those family tales. The ones that were always edited, trimmed, airbrushed, leaving out the youngest daughter who got betrayed for daring to speak the truth. But now I edit nothing. I let every scar stay visible. No cover-ups. Dinner table, one plate, one glass, one scoop of mashed potatoes, and a mailbox full of cards from new friends, people who know who I am, not who I was told to be in the old family script. I used to think I wouldn't survive a holiday with empty seats. But then I realized any holiday overflowing with people who shrink you so they can shine isn't a holiday. It's a performance. and I stepped off that stage. My mom didn't call. Sienna, of course, didn't either. I see their names pop up in my mind like blocked texts, still there, but without power. I walked the neighborhood, saw homes full of people, full of laughter. I didn't feel envy. I just listened. Some families reunite in love. Some unite to keep a family betrayal buried. I don't belong to the second kind anymore. I don't need burning revenge in the way of getting even. I live my revenge every day, by surviving, by standing tall, by living clear and on my own terms. I signed a new job contract, enrolled in night law school, opened my own bank account, took back my last name. Callahan, no longer meaning sisterhood. Now it just means me. Every step I take is a silent declaration. I don't need them to make the holidays whole. I only need myself. Whole, unbroken, no longer twisting myself into someone they'd approve of. I lit a candle next to an old photo. In it, I'm smiling because I was told to smile, surrounded by people who are no longer my family. I didn't burn the photo. I burned the expectation. And that flame, that's all the revenge I need. If silence is all you're left with after a family betrayal, will you use it to pity yourself? Or will you use it to build a life that no longer needs permission to exist? Not every door that opens deserves to be walked through. Some are painted with promises, varnished with family ties, but behind them stand walls built of lies. I used to live in a house like that, but today I'm building a new one where no one has to pretend, one where the only knock that gets answered is the one carrying truth. I moved into my new apartment on a rainless morning. No announcement, no housewarming party, no banner reading, welcome to a new chapter. Just me, and boxes full of things I once feared letting go. My birth certificate, bank documents, diploma, and an old photo, me, 8 years old, holding a birthday cake alone. I hung that photo right by the front door, not to remember the sadness, but to greet the little girl who survived every betrayal handed down by those she called family. This is her home now. I didn't buy a double bed, didn't set up a dining table for 4 like I used to. I bought a small table, a single chair, a teapot made for one. I'm not lonely. I've simply stopped saving space for people who chose to leave. I thought back to all the family tales they told when I was younger. Stories repeated at every holiday, as if repetition made them true. But now I understand. Not everyone who tells a story often is telling the truth. Not everyone who calls you family treats you like one. I used to be a supporting character in my own life. But those hidden revenge moments are no longer hiding. They take the shape of action. I learned how to read contracts, ask questions, pay off debts that weren't mine but were under my name. This isn't one of those flashy revenge stories with a dramatic twist. This is the life I live, one decision, one recovery, one quiet triumph at a time. A friend once asked, "What if your sister apologized?" I shook my head. She doesn't need to. I don't live this life waiting for an I'm sorry. I live it so I don't need one. I know there are others still stuck in cheating stories they never wrote, but can't stop reading. They have doors, too, locked with guilt, with fear of breaking tradition. But here's what I've learned. You don't need a key from the person who betrayed you. You can break the lock, or better yet, build a new door. I taped a small handwritten note to my door. No space for lies here. If you come with truth. If you had the strength to rebuild your life, who would you invite through that new door? The ones who once lied to your face, or the truest, strongest version of yourself? I once believed I'd never trust anyone again. But then I realized trust isn't a gift we hand to others. It's the soil we plant in ourselves. Even after betrayal stories, even when your heart has been torn by infidelity stories, there are seeds that lie dormant, waiting for light. And sometimes that light comes as a letter, a hug, a single whispered, "I believe you." I received a letter from my advanced writing teacher, the first person to see me as a writer, not a victim. She wrote, "Your essay isn't just homework. It's a declaration. You lived through something most people would never dare name. And you named it with a steady voice." I read it 3 times. Then I cried. Not the kind of tears that emptied me the way they did when I was living inside a true infidelity story, hidden like a stain. This time, the tears came soft, like the first drops watering soil untouched for too long. I wrote her back. Included in the envelope was my final essay, a first chapter in the book I'm writing. About me, about resistance, about gathering the broken shards of betrayal and building something more honest from them. Not for them, for me, and for everyone still trapped in betrayal stories, too afraid to speak. At a small community reading, I stood and read my work aloud. No stage lights, no microphones. But after I finished, a woman stood, eyes red, walked over and hugged me. She whispered into the collar of my sweater, "You said what I've never had the courage to say. Thank you." I didn't know her, but that hug didn't need a name. It was proof that truth, once released, can ripple outward, not to destroy, but to clear a path. I began to understand, not everyone is heard. But when one person speaks with honesty, they don't just free themselves. They plant the seed for someone else's liberation. I was once a side character in the infidelity stories others wrote, and I bore them in silence. Now I hold the pen. I rewrite. I don't soften the edges. I let my words bleed raw, salty like wounds, warm like tears, clear like morning sunlight. I no longer need apologies. I need honest voices. I don't need to go backward to fix anything. I'm moving forward, carrying every lesson, sowing something stronger, kinder, more real into what comes next. After all the betrayal stories that once held you hostage in fear, if today you were handed a small seed of trust, would you hide it, waiting for someone else to water it? Or would you be the one to give it light first? Some houses never need locks because no one wants to come in. And then there are homes like the one I'm building. No lock, but truth is the only thing allowed through the door. Here, there's no seat for those still living in pretense. No room for anyone who cloaks betrayal in the name of family. This house doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. And I'm the one holding the door. I didn't paint the walls white. I chose terracotta, earth scorched and stepped on, but still alive. Not because I enjoy clinging to pain, but because I won't whitewash the things that shaped me. I hung a line of my own poetry above the stove. No one here is forced to pretend. No pretending to smile. No pretending to forgive. No pretending to trust those who once cut my trust into ribbons, like in those cheating wife stories people love to whisper about. Except I lived it, loud and real. I remember once, back in the old house, I caught my mother crying in the kitchen. She wiped her face and turned to me with a forced smile, like everything was fine. From her, I learned silence, learned how to hide pain behind lipstick and casseroles, learned how to build a happy family out of lies stacked like bricks. But I also learned I would never do that again. I'm not building a nest. I'm building a shelter for the truth. No scent of fresh cookies to mask old wounds. No family movie nights where everyone's on their phones, hiding stories of cheating behind screens. Here, if someone says, "I love you," they'd better live it or leave. I had a few friends over. One asked, "What if one day your mom or sister shows up at your door?" I smiled. Not bitter. Not cold. This door has no lock, but it has no room for pretending either. They can come in if they come in real. I don't get revenge by hurting them back. I get revenge by living so honestly that lies can't survive near me. This isn't just a true infidelity story anymore. It's a rebirth, and I'm the one who midwifed my new life into existence. I pour a cup of tea, sit on the balcony, let the wind braid my hair. No one passing by would guess a war just ended here. But I know, I've just walked a full circle. Pain, betrayal, awakening, and now peace. I once thought I wouldn't survive it. Now I'm not just surviving. I'm laying down each brick of a life with no performance, no masks, no lies. If you were given a house that could only be built with truth, who would you invite inside? The ones who used lies as shelter, or the most honest version of yourself that once got pushed out? I used to live a life someone else wrote for me, with a name they chose, a role they assigned, lines they needed me to speak. But then I wondered, if I could step out of the family drama stories, could I rewrite it all from the beginning, with my own name, my own voice, my own pain and rebirth? I didn't need approval. I needed truth. I officially changed my name on a Monday morning at 8:07 a.m. No flowers, no confetti, just a paper form, a clerk's nod, and a new line of ink, Nora Callahan. Not the name they wanted me to keep, but the one I chose after everything. I had once been a side character in family revenge stories others told. The overlooked girl whose sister stole every spotlight. The daughter taught by her mother to stay silent so the family could save face. I used to think that was destiny, that maybe my role was to shrink. But then, small acts turned into a quiet revolution. No fireworks, no screaming, but clear, deliberate steps. I changed my number. I updated my passwords. I erased old photos from social media. And now I changed my name. That was my human revenge. Not to hurt them, but to stop hurting myself. A friend asked, "Does it feel different, having a new name?" I smiled. Of course it does. Every time someone calls me by this name, I feel seen, not for who I used to be, but for who I'm becoming. I began rewriting my first novel. No more pen names. No more inspired by a fictional character. It was an infidelity story, a family drama story, a rebirth. And in chapter 1 I wrote, "This isn't a story told by the victor. It's a story written by the survivor." I sent the manuscript to a small press. No big hopes, no begging, but they called me back. And the editor said, "I've never read something so raw, so real, so painful, yet so alive. Are you planning to keep writing?" I said, "I'm already still living. Writing is the easier part." I placed a little nameplate on my writing desk. Nora Callahan, author. Every letter on the page was a reclaimed breath. From the people who once broke my voice. I don't need the whole world to read my story. I just need one person to stop, breathe, and find themselves in it. I've stepped out of the dark, carrying every piece I picked up along the way. No more background role. No more asking for permission. I am the main character now. And this story bears my name, written in blood, in tears, and in unshakable courage. If you had the chance to rewrite your life using your own name, would you wait for someone's permission? Or would you pick up the pen, write every line, and finally let the world hear your true voice for the first time?